Time to confess, did you steal that car? Or did you sweet-talk someone into signing it over? Beckett snarled, his words dripping with suspicion as he glared at the black man standing defiantly in the pristine white neighborhood. He was convinced he'd nabbed a fraud in the act until the man flipped open his wallet, revealing a badge gleaming with the Department of Justice seal. In that moment, Beckett realized he just pointed a gun at the Federal Director of Civil Rights. What state are you in right now? If you witness this, would you lower your gaze or rise up, shouting, "Enough is enough"? The midday sun blazed like a furnace over Bellevue Ridge, its heat pressing down like a heavy hand, freezing the scene in a surreal stillness. Red brick pavement shimmered blindingly, almost daring you to look away, while gray-tiled roofs peeked shyly behind rows of manicured pine trees, their perfection so rigid it felt suffocating. The lawns gleamed flawless, not a blade out of place, not a leaf astray, proclaimed as the ideal haven for raising kids, a postcard of peace and perfection. Yet beneath this polished exterior lurked an unyielding watchfulness. Cameras dotted every street lamp, wall, and sleek doorbell, their unblinking eyes tracking every step, every breath of residents and strangers alike. Then, a sleek black Audi rolled to a halt, a bold streak against the uniformity, stopping just shy of the corner. Out stepped a tall, broad-shouldered black man, exuding quiet confidence, gripping a luxurious leather briefcase. He paused before house number 84, flipping open a folder to confirm his friend's name before reaching for the doorbell. Which city of the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you have any confrontation with the HOA wheel. Narrate your story on our channel. Doorbell. No door opened immediately, not a sound at all. He took out his phone and sent a brief message, standing outside. Anyone home? Then he stood there calmly observing without a trace of nervousness. The surroundings were astonishingly quiet, except for the neighbor's lawn mower mixing with the cicadas' incessant buzzing in the oppressive heat like a shameless soundtrack to the injustice waiting to unfold. On the second floor of the house opposite, a white woman slipped behind the curtain, staring coldly before calmly dialing 911. Her voice was steady, ruthless, as if ordering a pizza without any sympathy. There is a black stranger lingering in front of the neighbor's house. I am not sure he belongs to this area. He looks very suspicious. This brief statement was full of seeds of discrimination. A prejudiced view accepted as truth without question. This brief statement was full of seeds of discrimination. A prejudiced view accepted as truth without question. The dispatch center quickly forwarded the information without any additions or hesitation. A nearby patrol unit received the task. The driver was Officer Troy Beckett, a third officer with 13 years in the force, specializing in upscale neighborhoods. He did not need to hear the full report to picture the scenario. A black man without a clear reason to be in a wealthy neighborhood filled with doctors, lawyers, and powerful people. Suspicion needed no justification. It was ingrained in the system's very core. The patrol car quietly turned into Bellevue Ridge, its siren sounding briefly before falling silent. That brief siren was enough to draw attention and spread fear without disturbing anyone else. Beckett slowed down, eyes fixed on the man standing across from the house, phone in hand, the sleek black suit, the luxury briefcase, polished leather shoes, all too neat and proper to be a delivery person or repairman. But above all, he was not from here, and that was an unforgivable offense in Beckett's eyes. Beckett stepped out of the car, his face calm, but his eyes filled with judgment, already choosing a verdict that could not be changed. His voice was cold, but not harsh. Is this Audi yours? The man turned, slightly, furrowing his brows when he saw the blue uniform, a sign of authority that could crush him at any moment. He nodded lightly and glanced toward door 84, silently, confirming, I am in the right place, doing the right thing. But Beckett did not care. He moved closer, hands open. A familiar control gesture repeated like an endless lesson in domination. Do you have ID? Beckett's voice was colder now, surveillance and threat intertwined. The man did not answer immediately. He took out his wallet from his jacket pocket, opened it, but did not hand it over directly. Instead, he held it tightly and replied with a challenging question. "Why am I being suspected?" The question hit Beckett like a slap, causing him to hesitate for a moment. His mind wavered between continuing as the enforcer and stepping into direct confrontation. In the end, pride, honed by hundreds of traffic stops and dozens of silent captures of others, won. "Listen, I'm asking because I have a legitimate reason. This is a private residential area. I just received a report of a non-resident lingering in front of a resident's house. Can you prove your presence here is legal?" Beckett's voice sharpened, cutting like a knife. His posture shifted, half defensive, half commanding, like a predator, ready to seize its prey. But the man did not back down. He raised the briefcase to chest level so Beckett could clearly see the embossed name. "J. Raymond. I came to deliver documents. My friend lives here. She is working and I do not want to cause noise." "What is her name?" Beckett asked sharply, then took a half step back, hand on his radio. The air immediately tensed like a stretch string, signaling an impending investigation. He began checking the license plate through the internal system, eyes never leaving the man. Looking through the audio window, Beckett found nothing else but leather seats, a pen, 2 bottles of water, and a glasses case, none of which could justify suspicion. "I still need to see your papers," Beckett said again, his tone commanding and no longer hiding his frustration. The man took out his driver's license calmly, but cautiously without hesitation. Beckett took it, skimmed the name Malcolm Trenton. The name did not immediately catch his attention, but he recorded the information. Over the radio, Beckett, checking name Malcolm Trenton. Male, about 40 years old, black, not residing in the area, standing in front of house number 84, Bellevue Ridge. The man stood silently, saying nothing more, eyes still fixed on the door that remained unopened. Beckett looked at him, waiting for a reaction. Confusion, anger, or apology, anything to end this inspection quickly. But all he received was cold and steadfast silence. The silence made Beckett impatient. "Can you sit on the step while I verify further?" His words were both a request and a command, leaving no room for refusal. Trenton did not respond or argue. He turned to the car, opened the driver's door, placed the briefcase inside, then closed it. He then sat on the porch steps, back straight, not leaning on anything, eyes still fixed in the same direction. From a high angle, a nearby house's camera recorded the entire moment. The image of a black man being asked to sit right in front of his friend's house simply because someone felt he was different, suspicious, based solely on racial discrimination. An injustice imposed by the system is something inevitable and unquestionable. Beckett had no idea he was being watched. In his mind, Trenton was just a shadow, a potential troublemaker, an example proving the unconditional power of the police, a power that needed no reason, no explanation, ready to impose and extinguish everything. This was his first serious mistake. A mistake clearly recorded through the camera lens, seemingly small, but opening a chain of unstoppable consequences. The sun remained scorching. Trenton did not sweat, but his eyes began to burn with a different fire, not looking at Beckett, but staring straight into the fake face of this society, into how it deceives itself with layers of false safety, only to continue sustaining injustice, discrimination, and deadly prejudice. Beckett stood diagonally to the left of the steps, facing Malcolm, legs spread wide as if ready for an attack. His hands still held the driver's license, but his eyes no longer followed the papers. Instead, they carried a look full of prejudice and hostility. After a few seconds of silence, the first sentence came out in a tone dripping with sarcasm and contempt. "Clean papers indeed. Looks quite professional." He lightly jerked his chin toward the shiny black Audi parked neatly by the roadside. "But you know what? People wearing suits wandering around this area at noon usually aren't harmless types. Malcolm kept a calm gaze, his voice steady, but firm. Do you want to see the car insurance? Also the registration papers. He opened his wallet, took out the sheets of paper, and held them toward Beckett. Beckett, however, did not touch them, just glanced briefly and pressed the button on his radio. I need a backup unit at Bellevue Ridge. Code 1029. Possible forged documents. His voice was cold, like a preemptive strike, rejecting everything Malcolm had presented. Malcolm sneered, a sound almost compressed into a soft breath to faint for Beckett to hear. He turned his face toward the still-closed door. The name Emma Kingsley shone clearly on the phone screen, placed on the doorstep like a defiant proof. But he did not press the call, not because of hesitation, but to see how far Beckett would dare go with his stupid prejudice. Beckett stepped closer, lowering his voice and drawing out words thick with disdain. Wearing a suit, driving an expensive car, then standing outside someone else's house without knocking. Think that can fool the police. His eyes moved from the silver watch on Malcolm's wrist to the shiny leather shoes before stopping on the face of the black man, showing no emotion. This time you really invested well, trying to prove who you are. From the house opposite, a window was slightly open. A boy of about 7 stood next to his father, his face confused. He tugged his father's sleeve and whispered shrilly, "Daddy, why is he yelling?" The man did not answer. He pulled the curtain closed, but his hand trembled over the phone's recording button, a sign of vague fear. Unwilling to be open, Beckett was unaware he was being filmed from multiple angles. He maintained his solid stance, a proud white police officer doing his duty in a wealthy neighborhood. He saw nothing unusual except a black man dressed neatly. "What are you going to do next here?" Beckett asked, though he already knew the answer. "As I said, returning the documents," Malcolm answered shortly. "My friend hasn't confirmed yet. Either you are lying or someone inside the house is afraid of you and won't open the door." Beckett leaned forward, eyes fixed through the thick glass of the front door. This neighborhood isn't used to surprise visits like this. Malcolm slowly stood up, not to leave, but to pick up the phone on the step. He scrolled through messages, not responding. "I will stand here for another 3 minutes. If no one comes out, I will leave. If clarification is needed, I am ready to answer when my lawyer is present." The last sentence made Beckett suddenly uneasy. But instead of stopping, he pushed further. "Who do you think you're talking to? This is a secure area. What lawyer? Or did you just grab a card online and claim to be one?" Trenton reached for the documents inside the car, but had not opened the door when Beckett raised his hand to stop him. "Don't touch the car. I haven't given permission." Beckett's voice flared with alertness mixed with irritation at being controlled. He was not used to being watched, not used to someone turning the tables. Soon after, a second patrol car quietly rolled into the area. The lights were off, the siren silent. Only faint blue and white lights flickered through the shadows of trees. A female officer stepped down and approached. "Beckett, what's the situation?" she asked quietly, her eyes scanning Malcolm as if inspecting every inch of skin. "Suspicious papers show signs of forgery. Purpose cannot be verified," Beckett replied concisely. The female officer nodded without further comment, just standing to observe. Malcolm looked at her, his eyes briefly heavy with sadness. In that moment, everything seemed to pause. No sirens, no shouting, no clashes. But in Trenton's eyes, the dust of prejudice settled, heavier than ever. From the last house, down the street, the wooden door swung open. A blonde woman in business attire hurried out, holding a phone. She looked around and stopped her gaze on the group standing in the middle of the road. "Malcolm," she called loudly. Everyone turned. Beckett froze slightly. Malcolm nodded gently. "I'm waiting for you." The woman ran up. "Sorry, I was in a Zoom meeting, so I didn't hear the phone." She turned to the 2 officers. "This is my friend, a federal civil rights investigator. He came to return documents from the last meeting. Beckett stood speechless. The words cut through the entire scenario he had carefully built over the past 15 minutes, but no one spoke to correct him. The female officer bowed her head in greeting to Malcolm, then walked away. Beckett still did not react. He held the driver's license, studying the name line again carefully. His gaze lingered. The truth hit like a thick drop of oil soaking into paper, slow but undeniable. No further explanation was needed. Everything was clear to those witnessing, even to the eyes behind the curtains. One look was enough to expose the power disguised as justice, dressed in uniform, allowing itself to command, question, and judge a person simply because of their skin color. Do you belong here? The appearance of Emma Kingsley, the only person who could confirm Malcolm Trenton's identity, seemed poised to dissolve all the tension hanging in the air. She stepped out onto the street, breathing heavily after hastily leaving the online meeting, her eyes still carrying a look of confusion and worrying. The moment a single sentence escaped her lips, the atmosphere immediately shifted, as if the wall Beckett had built to block out all the irrational things for the past 15 minutes began to tremble and collapse by the second. Yet Beckett, with all his stubbornness and selfishness, refused to let that wall fall. He could not admit that everything he had done was completely unreasonable in front of an invited guest, someone with a clear contact address, and who was a member of the federal government. To him, the most important thing was not the truth, but holding onto the fragment of dignity that was crumbling minute by minute. Beckett took a step back, trying to maintain a fake calm while signaling to the female officer beside him. Not enough grounds to confirm identity. Maintain position. While conducting further checks, he said quietly, his tone both commanding and suggestive. The words were procedurally correct, but entirely unethical and unfair. It was a tactic to buy time, a way to cover up a mistake he refused to acknowledge. Emma wanted to speak up, but Trenton raised his hand decisively, without anger or fear. He looked at Emma and gently shook his head, silently, telling her, "Don't interfere now. Let me face what he's constructing. Please sit down on the grassy roadside while we complete verification," Beckett said, his voice like reading an administrative order, cold and unyielding. Yet in his eyes there was a subtle, painful satisfaction and pride. To him, just having a black man sit on the roadside grass, even for a brief minute, was enough to assert his control and authority. A small action, but filled with oppression, allowing him to pride himself on not being a total failure. Trenton said nothing. He slowly stood up, clasped his hands behind his back, walked toward the car, opened the driver's door, placed his briefcase inside, then gently closed the door. On the grass at the roadside, he left only his body, nothing else. He sat down with his legs bent at right angles, hands resting on his knees, back straight. He did not avoid or dodge anyone's gaze. His eyes remained fixed on Beckett, neither expecting nor challenge. It was a silence so profound that it forced the other side to look at themselves, to reconsider their action. Across the street, a middle-aged man riding his bike home after a morning run paused when he saw the strange scene in this usually peaceful and clean neighborhood. A black man in a suit sitting quietly on the grass. Two police officers standing nearly encircling him, yet no violent act taking place. He did not ask questions or judge. He quietly pulled out his phone and switched to video mode. The phone was raised just enough to avoid attention, but still captured the entire scene. In his eyes, there were no shouting or clashes, but the wrongness lay precisely in the presence of this scene. He clearly felt the injustice being concealed. Beckett continued speaking into the radio, constructing a one-sided report filled with prejudice and manipulation. "It seems we caught an imposter. Valid document, but does not match the local address system. The individual remains seated. Send more personnel for verification." His voice emphasized the words imposter and do not match with strong insinuation, trying to weave a plausible story for those on the other end or to convince himself later. This order was issued before the truth was settled when the line between caution and imposition was still blurred. Trenton did not react, no frown, no shrug. He just raised his head and looked directly at Beckett, a gaze not begging or contemptuous, but starkly clear, forcing the other to ask himself, "What am I doing? What am I trying to prove? Are you sure you don't want to check again?" Trenton asked, his voice low, clear, without threat or flattery. It was a timely reminder, aimed at the right person in the right place. But Beckett was still struggling between his hollow pride and the truth in front of him. He hesitated, then answered awkwardly, "Check what?" as if he had just uttered nonsense. "My information. My position. My ID is bad. Get a chance to show. Anytime. But I'm giving you the chance to adjust your approach before it becomes official." Trenton emphasized the phrase "becomes official" as a subtle warning. It's not too late if you know when to stop. Beckett remained silent. He neither retreated nor advanced. He looked around and stopped at the third patrol car parked at the end of the street. A higher-ranking officer stepped out slowly and approached. His eyes were cautious and restrained, not rushing to judge, simply observing from Trenton to Emma, then to Beckett, as if understanding the situation by watching was enough. Emma's phone rang. She answered, then whispered a few words to Trenton. He nodded, stood up, and lightly dusted his hands as if closing a meaningless pause. No one stopped him from leaving. Beckett stood there confused about what to do next. Trenton unbuttoned his coat and pulled out a hard dark blue wallet with shiny metal edges. From it, he took out a badge embossed with the logo of the Department of Justice. He raised it without a word. The sunlight pierced the silver metal reflecting into Beckett's eyes. The inscription was clear, needing no explanation. Civil Rights Division, U.S. Department of Justice. He held up the badge only for a moment, then put it away, allowing no one to get a clear shot, preventing that image from becoming a joke or a media event. He was not there to teach Beckett a lesson or create drama. He was there simply to complete a task, return the documents. No one spoke further. The man filming moved his bike away, but kept the camera steady. The camera from house number 80 continued recording. A child peered silently through the curtain, watching quietly. Beck had stood there, but the atmosphere had completely changed. No one believed the story he had built over the radio anymore, and perhaps he no longer believed it himself. The sound of the third patrol vehicle came to a complete stop in front of house number 84, the wheels softly grinding over the smooth brick sidewalk. The door opened and a large man stepped out, his salt and pepper hair closely cropped at the nape of his neck. His name was Winslow, a senior officer responsible for overseeing special contact cases within the district. Unlike Beckett, who wore a tactical uniform, he was dressed in a light gray shirt with a name tag pinned directly to his chest pocket. His presence instantly shifted the gaze of everyone on the block. He was someone who had been around long enough in the field to know when to be firm and when to step back. Winslow did not question anyone. He merely glanced toward Trenton's position, then looked at Beckett, who was standing as if rooted under the sun. Beckett still held the vehicle registration paper in his hand, unwilling to let go. Emma stepped back a few paces, distancing herself from the thickening tension. The female officer who had been present earlier also stood silently, seemingly trying to keep her distance from the others. "Who is the person being checked?" Winslow asked, not loudly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear. Without waiting for an answer, he walked straight up to Trenton, his gaze fixed on the silver-edged blue wallet that had just been put away. "Where are your papers?" Winslow raised his hand, his tone steady, like delivering an order in court. Malcolm was unhurried. He took out his wallet once more, this time opening it slower and more carefully. He withdrew an ivory-cold hard card embossed with a golden Department of Justice seal sharply outlined in silver. No extra words, no expression, just a single motion, extending the card directly toward Winslow. The atmosphere changed immediately. Winslow did not take the card right away. He simply stared, then squinted as he read the engraving on the surface. Malcolm T. Trenton, Director, Civil Rights Enforcement, USAD. Winslow's eyes dropped slightly, his hand lowered. His lips pressed together quietly. No one spoke for nearly 10 seconds. A brief silence, but for someone like Beckett, it was enough to tense his entire body. Winslow turned his head toward Beckett, and with just one look, without any scolding, Beckett stepped back, his mouth slightly open, as if about to explain, but unable to speak. Malcolm still held the card, neither withdrawing it nor offering more. He let the atmosphere shift on its own. When Winslow leaned forward, instead of grabbing the card, he slightly tilted his body and extended his hand, a quiet gesture, and unexpected. Rather than asserting his superior authority as usual, Winslow reached out first, as if acknowledging fault or offering recognition. Malcolm took the hand, a firm handshake without squeezing. But at that moment, all previous boundaries disappeared. There was no longer anyone being checked, no suspect, no patrol lingering with a question mark. Beckett, standing nearby, had never witnessed a senior officer personally shake hands with someone he had planned to arrest less than half an hour before. He had never imagined that man was senior, even to his own superior. "I am the Director of Federal Civil Rights Investigations under the DOJ," Malcolm said for the first time since the beginning, his voice clear enough for all to hear. Not loud, not harsh, but those words were like a knife that tore away the curtain of prejudice that had been carefully drawn since the start. Beckett could no longer hide his pale face. His lips tightened, his hand relaxed, unable to react. The female officer behind bowed her head. Emma took another step back, her eyes still fixed on Malcolm, revealing no less respect. Winslow swallowed hard, then nodded. "I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience," he said. The apology was not out of obligation, but because he knew such an incident could not leave a faint mark. Trenton nodded, but said nothing. He put the card back into his wallet neatly, as if it had never been shown. At that moment, from the left corner of the block, came a familiar clicking sound, the noise of a bicycle stopping. The middle-aged man, who had been recording video all along, stopped without hiding his phone or turning off the camera. He got off the bike, raised his hand lightly, and asked loudly, "Is that person really the federal director?" No one answered, but Winslow's brief nod was enough. A nearby house door creaked open slightly. A white woman in her 40s, still holding a cup of coffee, slowly widened the door and looked out onto the street. She said nothing, only standing and watching. The silence thickened, and no one could break the suffocating atmosphere. Beck had exhaled sharply, his gaze fixed on the ground. He tried to maintain a posture as if still in control, but no one close by lent him that shadow anymore. Everyone kept their distance. Even Winslow stepped slightly away toward Malcolm as if forming an invisible boundary. Then the unexpected happened. Malcolm turned to Beckett and took a step toward him. His eyes were neither heavy nor threatening, but seemed to place an unavoidable truth on Beckett's shoulders. "Among all the choices, you chose the easiest way, checking someone who does not look like those you are used to. Sometimes the slip is not in the act, but in the thought you allow to run wild." Beckett did not respond. He had no words to fill the silence. Winslow looked over, grabbed Malcolm's arm, as if signaling to end this quickly, but Malcolm withdrew his hand. He turned to Emma, and nodded gently. "I will come back for the documents if you don't mind," he said, his tone returning to that of a proper guest. Emma smiled, her eyes softening as if to erase the last trace of tension. "Of course," she replied. Malcolm stepped up onto the porch, his hand on the doorknob, but not rushing to open it. He looked back around, faces behind curtains, eyes beyond fences, all observing him as a figure who had overturned the usual order, and he needed to say no more. A handshake had done what a bullet never could, silenced the one who fired the shot. The early afternoon sunlight slanted across the stone-paved street, casting patchy shadows that stretched long beneath the hesitant steps of Officer Beckett. In front of him, Malcolm Trenton stood motionless, showing no anger or resistance. This stillness made every muscle in Beckett's body tighten, tense, and contract. No one needed to speak. Yet Beckett felt compelled to stammer as if his mouth was no longer under his control. "I don't know you are." He tried to add another sentence, but couldn't find an appropriate way to address him. He could not say sir, nor colleague, and certainly not suspect. The familiar words from Police Reaction Manual suddenly seemed meaningless, excessive, even counterproductive. His eyes sought some point of support, but everything avoided his gaze, including the female officer beside him and Winslow, the stern superior who turned away, unwilling to intervene. Malcolm did not answer. He slowly pulled his personal phone from his pocket. No one touched or stopped him. The camera opened on the screen, pointing directly at Beckett. It did not capture the whole scene or tell a story. It simply recorded the face of the man blocking a federal civil rights director, a federal badge holder, suspected and forced to squat on the grass verge in a white neighborhood. This was living evidence created by the very order given. Malcolm held the phone steadily, his eyes never leaving Beckett, but carrying no insult. They simply reflected the truth, a persistent truth few dared to face. Each passing second chipped away at Beckett's confidence. Sweat soaked his collar, strands of hair clung to his forehead, and his once steady hands trembled slightly, uncertain whether to hide behind or hang loosely by his side. At the street's end, the sound of an iron gate swinging open rang out. An elderly woman with silver-white hair stepped slowly from her porch onto the sidewalk. She wore a dark knitted jacket and held a bamboo broom, not for sweeping, but as a habit of caution in every step. She looked straight at Malcolm without speaking or showing surprise. Her eyes sparkled behind yellowed glasses, and she nodded softly and deeply. That nod touched the thick memories of someone who had lived too long in a society where skin color meant constant proof of worth. It was neither congratulations nor triumph. It was a silent sign, as if she had waited a long time for this moment, a moment when a black man did not bow, did not argue, did not resist, but let the system expose its deep cracks itself. She stood there without leaving or interfering, merely witnessing, as if this was part of the justice she still believed in, though she had never seen it fully realized. A child peeked from the doorway beside her, eyes wide and restless. "Nana, what's happening?" the child whispered. She did not answer immediately, only placed her hand gently on the boy's shoulder, whispering to herself, what should have happened since 1968. Meanwhile, Malcolm kept holding the phone, his expression unchanged, and without adding any emotion. He neither questioned, declared, nor threatened. He let silence do its work as a deep pit that those who once thought themselves at the peak had to look down into, unable to deny. Beck had tried to take a deep breath, but the air seemed to choke in his throat. He knew he was being filmed, not just by one, but many. From the distant street corner, at least 3 phones were raised, on bicycles, from residents across the street, and the schoolboy only late from the bus stop. They said nothing, but everyone knew they held something important, each video a living piece of evidence. Every moment captured was part of an indictment, never filed in court. No one knew where those recordings would go. No one knew if they would air on CNN or become a tweet with millions of views, but all were keenly aware that they existed. This time, witnesses were not stories. The witnesses were the eyes of cameras that could not lie or be silenced. Malcolm lowered the phone without speaking to Beckett, without demanding a response, without forcing apologies. He turned to Winslow, looking directly into the superior's eyes. Winslow nodded, the first time without uttering an apology. Holding his gaze as a deep acknowledgement, Malcolm walked to the car, took out his briefcase, checked its contents, then carefully closed it. When he turned back, Emma was already waiting on the doorstep, silent, quietly opening the door. Beckett remained frozen in place, and the female officer had returned to the vehicle, some residents began to approach, not to interfere, but to witness with their own eyes that this was truly happening, right where they had thought was safe, calm, and orderly. But that so-called calm only existed when those seen as different did not appear. Today, when Malcolm Trenton stood in the neighborhood as federal civil rights director, everything truly began to change. The old woman still had not left the sidewalk. She stood there like a silent pillar, looking at Beckett, then following Malcolm's figure as he entered Emma's house. In the sunlight filtering through the trees, her aged eyes glistened with something Beckett could not understand. Not joy or revenge, but peace. Someone who had endured a lifetime finally saw another stand up without yelling or fighting back. The silence in that moment was no longer fear, it was a choice. And this time, silence was the sharpest weapon. It was completely dark when the first video appeared online. The man who rode the bicycle that morning, the only person who clearly recorded the entire tense conversation, edited a portion of the clip and posted it on his personal TikTok account. He did not realize he had just sparked such a fierce wave. In the caption, he wrote only, "What happened in my neighborhood this morning? Police stopped a black man. He said he works for the Department of Justice." No name, no badge, no title, and no additional comment. That ambiguity caused the video to explode, fueling curiosity among social media crowds. The short clip, less than 20 seconds, showed a blurry image of Malcolm Trenton, but the sound was surprisingly clear. His voice was steady and firm. "I work for the Department of Justice." The sentence echoed in a strange silence on the street. No one reacted or confirmed it, but the firmness and clarity of the statement made viewers stop scrolling. It had no drama or climax, yet held a strange attraction, like a gentle but powerful strike aimed directly at the machinery of power. Within just 4 hours, the video reached over 300,000 views. The uploader's account gained more than 1,000 followers. Overnight, no one asked them to share it, and no shocking captions or sensational titles were needed. It was pure viral spread driven by the feeling you have to watch this because something is not normal. A blurry image, poor lighting, but a powerful phrase. "I work for the Department of Justice." That contrast awakened the deepest curiosity in social media users' brains. A black man was stopped by the police, yet he belongs to the Department of Justice. Why did he not shout? Why did he not show his badge immediately? Why did no one know his name? The first hashtag appeared from a young lawyer's account, Justice Director. Soon after, many other accounts reshared the clip with hashtags like racist, cop, Civil Rights Watch, and Dog Mana Suburbs. No one knew the real name of the black man, but everyone sensed he was not an ordinary person. Among thousands of comments, the repeated question was, "Who is he? What is his real name?" A Twitter user claiming to be a former Department of Justice intern wrote, "I'm sure I met this man in D.C. He holds an important role in civil rights." The tweet included a screenshot from the TikTok video. Though the lighting was poor and Malcolm's face was at an angle, it was enough to convince those who had seen him in closed hearings. They did not dare confirm the name, but all said he shows up at press conferences without an invitation. The ambiguity further spread the video. Analytical posts on the audio started to appear. A lip-reading expert confirmed Malcolm's lip movements for Department of Justice matched every syllable. Precisely. A social podcast commented, "I don't know who filmed this, but the fact that he didn't show his badge immediately and only said a single sentence created a bigger effect than flashing a badge to the camera." Not long after, another video from a residential corner camera was uploaded. The clip was shot from further away, showing a group standing outside Emma Kingsley's house with a moment when Beckett lowered his hand and stopped giving orders. Then Winslow stepped forward. Although the sound was unclear, subtitles read, "Senior officer arrives, but still lets the other man stand motionless in the street." That moment spread on Instagram with the caption, "True power does not need to shout, it just needs to exist." Malcolm did not post anything. His account was inactive. The Department of Justice office also did not make any statement. That silence only made the story more compelling. Social media took on a life of its own, speculating, creating profiles, citing the names of civil rights directors from government sites, filtering lists by profile pictures, and comments became a semi-official investigation. Some said Malcolm's silence was smart, others saw it as a tactic to maintain the upper hand, but all agreed on one thing: the man in the video was no ordinary person. His truth would soon be revealed because social media does not forgive unsolved mysteries. The original clip had already reached private law student groups. Summary reports by some independent journalists and even subreddits tracking police abuses. One standout comment with many upvotes read, "White cops thought they were stopping an unknown black man, but they were messing with a real civil rights machine." From just a 15-second sideways shot, an unclear face, an unknown name, and a short calm sentence, the story spread across platforms. 15 seconds without strong expressions, but enough to shake a community questioning whether justice still existed. And this time it did not come from a punch, but from a glance, from a simple sentence, and from a man who never spoke up since being stopped in the white neighborhood. Nearly 24 hours after the video spread at a speed like an exploding firework, in the night, an article appeared on the homepage of Capital Insider, an investigative newspaper specializing in federal government issues. The headline was bold and striking like a direct blow to the false face of the system. "Lawmaker humiliated in the street." The author was Fiona Greer, an independent investigative journalist known for her experience tracking closed-door hearings of the Department of Justice and the Senate. She was not a widely known name on social media, but among officials and internal media circles, Fiona was the one who knew exactly where to dig and when to reveal to embarrass false authority. Fiona had been watching the video on TikTok and recognized the familiar voice, the voice that had once been heard in secret Senate Judiciary Committee meetings when a federal civil rights representative presented cases of abuse of power and discrimination in law enforcement. While the social media crowd was still wondering who is he, Fiona immediately called a former staff member of the Civil Rights Office. After a brief call, she received 3 sharp words: Malcolm T. Trenton. Trenton was a name absent from social media, LinkedIn profiles, and any media events. He only existed in legal documents, internal announcements, and hearing transcripts with limited attendance. He was the kind of person who truly wrote the law, but never appeared on stage or perform. Yet now, his image sitting calmly on the grass beside white police officers had spread like a storm, tearing through the silent night of pretense. Fiona's article began with a sharp statement: "If you believe justice is always fairly executed, then perhaps you have never seen a lawmaker forced to sit on the grass simply because no one believed he belonged in an all-white neighborhood." She described Trenton as a key figure in restructuring the local abuse investigation process, the person behind numerous reform recommendations to Congress, and someone who had refused any honors to maintain independence in his duty. Malcolm Trenton's name began flooding major news outlets such as The Atlantic, The New York Times, and Politico. Each article repeated the famous line from the clip, "I work for the Department of Justice," but this time, readers knew the person behind. The words was real, with a true background and real responsibilities. Director of Civil Rights in the United States. He was no longer a shadowy figure in a dim video, but a symbol of justice challenging all prejudice. This truth was not only a slap to the deceitful face of the local executive system, but also a serious indictment of a corrupted judiciary. Under public pressure, the state police department held a stiff press conference. A spokesperson stood at the podium and read exactly 3 scripted sentences. "The case is under internal review. We will cooperate with the Department of Justice if requested. There is no official conclusion at this time." When reporters asked if Officer Troy Beckett would be suspended, the spokesperson coldly responded, "We do not comment on personnel matters during an investigation. This answer was as closed as courthouse doors, offering no transparency. But social media did not wait for these fake official conclusions. The name Beckett became the target of hashtag accusations. On Reddit, a post listed random traffic stops in Bellevue Ridge, all sharing one clear trait. The victims were people of color, and the one giving orders was Beckett. An anonymous account wrote, "He once demanded to search my nephew's backpack just because it was black. Now I understand why." Amid the whirlwind of accusations and chaos, Malcolm Trenton remained silent. No confirmation, no statements, no public comment, even though his name dominated every news outlet. Emma Kingsley, the only person able to respond directly, also refused the interview, citing respect for privacy. A national television channel sent an invitation for an interview at the office, but was rejected with a cold reply. Director Trenton is focused on his professional duties and will not comment on the matter. This silence only heightened public anxiety, dividing people into two camps. Supporters urging him to speak and skeptics waiting for mistakes to be exposed. Yet Trenton did not utter a word, revealing no cracks. Within the Department of Justice, there was no emergency meeting or leaked emails. However, insiders revealed that a group of civil lawyers had begun gathering investigation files related to local police, with Beckett's name first appearing in a file titled "Repeated Agent of Discriminatory Behavior." The international press did not ignore the story. A French news site published an article titled "Making Laws to Protect Others, Yet Being Suspected by the System Yourself." A Japanese reporter wrote, "An African American holding a position to protect justice has to use his badge to protect himself from the police." The story had gone beyond a suburban neighborhood, becoming a symbol of the global fight against racial discrimination. Malcolm Trenton remained silent. Every time he did not speak, every time he stepped away from the camera, it was a silent challenge to society as a whole. Why must the lawmaker prove his right to be in the street? And why does this silence alone change everything forever? He did not need to go on air, announce, or clarify. He let the truth do its work and forced America to face the long-answered question, is justice really for everyone? The editorial that appeared on Monday morning's front page of the New York Tribune avoided any sensational gimmicks or glaring red headlines and did not include a single shocking image. The title was concise yet sharp, "Holding Power with Calm." The author, Eliza Worth, a seasoned social commentator well known for her serious and profound writing style, who had never before used flowery or exaggerated language, began the article with a sentence that felt like a harsh verdict. "There are those who step into the middle of conflict without shouting, without raising a fist, yet cause the entire system to pause and listen to the silence they hold." Eliza did not mention Malcolm Trenton's name at the outset. Instead, she referred to the original video, carefully selecting footage from the moment he was ordered to sit on the grass to when he raised his badge. She then provided a thoughtful and in-depth analysis. No one forced him into silence. He chose to remain silent, but his silence made the person giving orders stammer, silenced the crowd nearby, and compelled social media to seek out explanations. For the first time, a mainstream article confirmed that this was not a private moment caught on camera, but a symbol of quiet power, a genuine form of power that requires neither shouting nor violent actions to be felt. Simultaneously, a surge of YouTube channels began releasing videos analyzing Trenton's body language. One channel specializing in psychology examined his steady breathing, unwavering and resolute gaze, and relaxed shoulders as he was made to sit down. They compared his demeanor with an FBI emergency response training video and concluded, "This man is not frightened because he understands he holds the initiative, not through imposed authority, but because there is nothing left to prove anymore." On TikTok, the moment Beckett lowered his head as Trenton raised his badge quickly turned into a viral trend. Users added the caption in bold letters, "Look up, you just made a mistake." But the most widely known was a tweet that spread across millions of accounts. "He doesn't need to shout. But everyone must remain silent. That phrase transformed into a rallying slogan printed on posters and t-shirts and became the opening quote for essays written by high school students. No one cared about Trenton's exact title anymore because his presence had transcended all official roles and had become a living symbol. At a prestigious law school in Boston, a group of senior students produced a 2-hour podcast solely dedicated to dissecting the 3-minute original video. They broke down every detail: how Trenton held his hands, how his eyes shifted toward Beckett precisely when his name was mentioned over the radio, and the moment he did not interrupt, but instead allowed the system to become entangled in its own mistakes. One student remarked, "If there is a course on legal responses to police abuse, this video should be required viewing in the first year." Within 24 hours, the original video amassed 5 million views. It began as a low-quality clip, poor lighting, and a shaky handheld camera. Yet, the event inspired many to seek out the original footage to truly grasp the strength behind such calmness. The curious thing was that the most shared moment was not when Trenton raised his badge, but when he was asked to sit down, ears rewound repeatedly, trying to understand why he did not react, why he did not leave, and how just a single look from him made everyone take a step back. In a noisy digital world where everyone fights to speak louder and capture attention, one person's silence managed to slow the entire space down. A street artist in Detroit painted a portrait of Trenton using gray paint on an old brick wall. The image did not show him standing tall or raising his badge, but rather sitting on the edge of the grass with his eyes angled toward the viewer. There were no slogans or names, only a small inscription underneath: "The price of calm is making the whole system tremble instead of you." In the Bellevue Ridge neighborhood where everything began, neighbors started to avoid reporters. Some families dodged questions about the incident. A young woman whispered to a friend, "I think he once taught my child about civil rights, but nobody knew he worked for the DOJ." That quiet presence made everyone feel uneasy. They did not harbor anger toward him, nor did they know how to apologize to someone who never demanded anything. Malcolm Trenton stayed silent. His office did not release any statements. He declined interviews, did not participate in public forums, and avoided television appearances. Even though his name had become a symbol, people debated whether this was humility or wisdom. Some believed he was preparing a major legal move, while others thought he was simply allowing the truth to unfold naturally, understanding that once the public raised their voices, everything could change. Eliza Worth closed her article with an unattributed quote: "The strongest person is not the one who silences others, but the one who makes them afraid to speak." And it was precisely Trenton, without shouting or retaliating, who accomplished this. He caused millions of people to stop, listen, and then fall silent, not out of fear, but because for the first time they understood that true power lies in calmness, in a single look, in a single word, and in a silence that lasts longer than any argument. 1 week after the incident, in a citizenship class at Southfield High School, the teacher played a very short video clip lasting only 15 seconds on the projector screen. This brief clip showed Malcolm Trenton being stopped on the street where he calmly said just one sentence: "I work for the Department of Justice." The entire class watched this clip in complete silence, absorbing every moment. When the clip ended, the teacher did not continue with a normal lecture as usual. Instead, she asked the students a direct question: "What do you think made this video spread so quickly?" The first hand raised was that of a white student with blonde hair wearing a sporty jacket. This student spoke confidently and with conviction. "Why didn't he say right from the beginning that he was the director of civil rights? If I were in his position, I would have immediately shown my badge to the police to avoid any unnecessary trouble or suspicion." Several other students nodded their heads, clearly agreeing with this viewpoint. To them, the logical and reasonable reaction was to eliminate any doubt as quickly as possible. However, from the back of the classroom, a voice spoke up, slow, thoughtful, and full of weight. A black student named Jordan sat up straight, eyes fixed on the board without turning to look at anyone else. Jordan said plainly, "If someone like him has to introduce himself, then justice must be very strange." The classroom fell completely silent after those words. Jordan did not continue speaking, but their gaze seemed to carry all the unspoken truths that adults often avoid confronting when teaching about civil rights, that sometimes rights do not lie solely in laws or official rules, but in how society accepts who is presumed innocent by default. The teacher nodded quietly in agreement, without any rebuttal, and simply said, "That sentence is worth writing down on your final exam." News of this small classroom moment eventually reached a local radio station. The station contacted the teacher for an interview and requested permission to quote the student's exact words. The next morning, a short news segment aired, directly quoting Jordan's statement. The report was then widely shared on Twitter along with a screenshot of Malcolm Trenton from the original video. The tweet quickly went viral, accompanied by the message, "If even the badge holder has to say who he is to be trusted, then the whole system has a problem." While public opinion was intensifying due to Trenton's silence, an unexpected figure appeared on a late-night talk show. Thomas H. Carrington, a retired police chief who had previously worked in the nearby area where the incident occurred, was invited to speak. He was not there because of any direct involvement, but because he had openly condemned the use of prejudice during patrols in predominantly white neighborhoods. During his segment, he looked directly into the camera without hesitation and said, "I used to act like Beckett. I once saw a black man step out of a nice car in a quiet neighborhood and immediately thought, something isn't right. I didn't shout or use violence, but I ordered the car to stop, asked for papers, and placed my hand on my gun. Today, I am not proud when I remember those actions." The audience in the studio remained silent for several seconds. The host did not interrupt or respond. Thomas continued, his voice slowing with reflection. "The danger of holding power is believing that all your suspicions are justified. But real justice begins when you start questioning the very reasons behind those suspicions." Thomas' confession quickly spread across social media. Hundreds of people commented on his admission, while quietly a statement appeared on the Ashbourne County Police Department's website. "Officer Troy Beckett is currently suspended pending an internal investigation." The department has no further comments. There was no press conference, no photos of handcuffs, no public apology. But for those who had followed the incident from the beginning, this move was enough to confirm one thing. For the first time, the system did not rush to cover up wrongdoing. Nevertheless, no one claimed that Beckett would be prosecuted. There was no law clearly stating that his actions constituted a criminal offense. Critics argued that the case would soon be downplayed with excuses like operational error or misunderstanding community check procedures. Yet some believed this time was different. The spread of awareness did not come from loud protests or violence, but from a single look, from a sentence, and from a person who neither argued nor cursed, nor raised his hand above his shoulder. At a student forum at Howard University, a law student expressed the idea, "The badge holder is not someone who raises it to demand rights. The true badge holder is someone strong enough to know when to show it and when to keep it hidden, not out of fear, but because he understands when society is ready to truly see it." Malcolm Trenton has not reappeared since the incident. He has not spoken publicly, has not shown his face, written opinion pieces, or responded to interview requests. A close friend of his, who wished to remain anonymous, sent a single message to reporters. He doesn't need to win, he just needs not to bow his head. Perhaps that alone is enough for those learning to understand this truth. Real power does not lie with the loudest voice, but with the one that makes society fall silent in order to listen. On the 10th day after the incident, a photo suddenly went viral on social media. Not the usual video clip, nor an angry status, full of rage. It was simply a silent moment captured from a side angle. Malcolm Trenton standing in the middle of the street, not looking toward the camera, holding a phone as if he had just saved the last data of a quiet struggle. Behind him, Officer Troy Beckett bowed his head, his hands hanging limply by his sides, his face pale under the harsh midday sun. There were no words, no handcuffs, no accusations, only a deadly silence, heavy enough to shock anyone who saw it. The photo was shared millions of times in less than 36 hours, quickly catching the attention of the editor of Time magazine. Just 1 week later, the image became the cover of a special issue titled America's Double Standards. Without a caption, interview, or behind-the-scenes story, the single frame forced all of America to confront the question, why are law enforcers humiliated, while those who abuse power remain calm and unshaken? The impact of the photo extended beyond the media. From art schools to student activist groups, hundreds of artists across the country began recreating the moment in their own styles. There were oil paintings portraying Trenton, a historical figure standing between white light and shadow, symbolizing justice. Minimalist sketches showing only two silhouettes, one standing tall, one bowed, with the title Weightless Power. Even a group of graffiti artists in New York painted an entire massive wall depicting Trenton standing firm over a map of the United States. Behind him, thousands of scrutinizing and challenging eyes. No one knew who took the original photo. The first person who shared it did not claim authorship. Some speculated it was a witness on the second floor of a nearby house who quietly took the shot without speaking, but that no longer mattered. The photo had transcended copyright, becoming a social symbol, the most tense intersection between power, identity, and silence. A prestigious law firm in Chicago organized a seminar on civil rights in the post-digital media era. They officially invited Malcolm Trenton to be the keynote speaker. His name was printed on banners and a reserved seat awaited him. Yet 3 days before the event, the organizers received a brief email. I will not speak. What needs to be seen has already been seen. No explanation, no substitute offered. His absence alone made everyone reflect. Perhaps that silence was the deepest answer to society as a whole. The media kept chasing. From CNN to political podcasts, no one missed the segment about Trenton. Not his words, but his choice to remain silent. They called him America's heaviest silent man. An unofficial title repeated until exhaustion, and commentaries as a counterpoint flag for an era that screams for attention. In a world where everyone wants to shout and seize the spotlight, Trenton became the only person who made people listen without any urging. And Beckett, he disappeared from public view after being suspended. No paparazzi photos, no remorseful posts, no statements from the police department. Rumors said he was being protected in a suburban resort, avoiding media pressure, but none of this could calm the wave of anger. The truth had escaped the tongues of those involved. It now belonged to the community. Those who continually shared, analyzed, and recreated that unyielding symbol every day. A communication professor at Columbia University said during a special discussion, when a still photo becomes a stronger symbol than hundreds of videos, it means society needs an image to face the truth, not just to prove what is wrong. At the center of that photo, Malcolm Trenton, without intention, became the face representing what America once promised black citizens, but never kept: unconditional respect. Conservative groups began fighting back by digging into Trenton's past, trying to find controversial statements or political ties to blur his symbolism. But what they did not expect was that the more they tried to expose cracks, the more they revealed their desperation against something uncontrollable: righteous silence. A famous black actor reposted the photo with the caption, "We have shouted enough. Maybe it is time to believe in the gay." Trenton did not reply to any emails, did not clarify anything, and did not appear at any events after the incident. But, day by day, more people recreated that stance. A child learned to recognize a badge from a textbook. A teacher used that image as a lesson about courage. A former silent person dared to speak out, and a whole nation could no longer turn away from the photo that completely changed how they defined power. Not as the strength of shouting, but as the steadfastness of resilient silence. Early that morning, well before the bustle of the day began, the heavy metal door to the internal hearing room at the Southeast Regional Federal Court quietly swung open. There was no sign of any names on the public schedule to announce what was about to take place. The atmosphere was deliberately kept discreet. No reporters were present, no cameras were rolling, and there were no official announcements to alert the press or public. Once those summoned had entered, the door closed behind them with a solid clang, sealing them off completely from the noisy chaos and glaring artificial lights of the outside world. Inside that small courtroom, the weight of what was about to unfold was immense, hundreds of times greater than the shine of any glamorous media hall. Here, every word spoken would be carefully measured and scrutinized, its echoes contained within the room, never to leak out. Yet the decisions made would shape how the entire judicial system would reflect upon itself and its values. Troy Beckett, the man who had arrogantly pulled a gun on Malcolm Trenton in a crowded street not long ago, now sat silently among the rows of hearing seats. His police uniform had been replaced by a dark-holed suit. The tie loosely hung around his neck, and the proud, almost intimidating air that once made passers-by avert their gaze had vanished. Now, Beckett was the one avoiding the eyes of everyone else in the room, particularly those of the man seated 2 rows across from him, Malcolm Trenton. The hearing was formally titled Internal Trial on Procedural Misconduct in Law Enforcement, a cold clinical phrase that sounded like a hollow formality meant to soften the severity of the allegations. But everyone present understood perfectly well the stakes involved. If this hearing were to stray from its proper course, the entire reputation and concept of justice within the region would rest precariously on a fragile, easily broken balance. Malcolm Trenton had not been on the original list of witnesses expected to appear. His arrival surprised the court coordinators and the defense lawyers representing Beckett. For weeks leading up to this moment, Trenton had all but disappeared from media attention, maintaining silence like a shadowy warrior moving unseen. Yet today he had come alone, without an assistant, without a private lawyer, without any form of escort, just himself, quietly and steadily, as he always had been. When Trenton entered the room, the atmosphere seemed to shift almost imperceptibly, but unmistakably. No one rose to their feet, yet every eye turned towards him. His dark gray suit was impeccably neat, his gestures humble yet filled with quiet authority, and his calm, steady gaze remained unchanged from that fateful midday encounter. The same deep, unyielding look, as if he were a cold stone, perfectly unpolished and unbreakable. The hearing commenced with Beckett's statement. He tried to maintain an even tone, describing the incident as reasonable suspicion based on resident reports and a routine checking procedure. However, when pressed on why he had called for backup despite no visible threatening behavior, Beckett faltered. His explanation shifted uneasily from claiming he felt threatened to citing an unclear context. Then settling on the complicated history of the area, the examiners exchanged cold, knowing glances, silently taking notes. No further debate was necessary. When it was time for testimony, Trenton did not rush to stand. He waited calmly until his name was formally called before stepping up to the podium. He carried no papers, no notes, only a sharp, focused gaze and unwavering confidence. An examiner asked plainly, "Can you explain why you did not present your identification immediately when requested?" Trenton tilted his head slightly, as if to silently confirm the question, creating a brief pause to ensure his answer would not be misinterpreted. Then he responded clearly, "Because no one needs to know who I am to be treated according to the law." The room fell into a profound silence. Pens halted midair, eyelids dropped slowly, and the pause that followed outlasted the entire preceding debate. No one reacted to the statement. Trenton said nothing further. nor did he shrink away from the weight of his words. That single sentence struck like a sharp dagger, piercing the carefully crafted arguments marshaled on the opposite side of the table. Beckett's lawyer quickly tried to salvage the moment with a counter question. Do you confirm that the officer did not know your identity before he acted? Trenton did not answer immediately. He placed his hand firmly on the podium, leaned forward slightly, and locked eyes with Beckett. There was no anger in his gaze, no trace of pity, only a look that forced the other man to confront his own conscience. Then he turned back to the examiner and asked calmly, "And does that change the nature of his behavior?" The hearing ended quietly. No applause, no immediate verdict, and no live media coverage. Yet, from the moment Trenton left the room, the mood in the hallways shifted palpably. Security personnel, who had previously paid little attention, now whispered quietly about the hearing's details. Representatives of various government agencies accompanying the oversight team began to make note of undeniable signs of misconduct. The doorman gave a subtle nod of acknowledgement as Trenton walked past. No one blocked his path, nor did anyone accompany him, but that silence resonated far louder than any accusation could. That evening's news made no mention of the internal hearing. Nevertheless, within the Department of Justice, the name Malcolm Trenton began to be linked with a new symbol, a man calm enough to teach the system about the limits of its power simply through his presence and a single powerful sentence. Meanwhile, for Troy Beckett, though he had yet to be formally convicted, the beginning of his downfall was official. Starting from the very moment he was forced to confront the foolish justification he once believed was enough to stop a man in a suit standing on a busy street. In the early hours of Wednesday morning, a PDF document exceeding 30 pages in length unexpectedly surfaced on a confidential legal forum. This sudden appearance took many by surprise, as the document was comprehensive and detailed, containing information that few had anticipated would be made public so abruptly. Within a matter of just a few hours, snapshots of selected excerpts from this document began circulating widely across various social media platforms, spreading at an astonishing rate. The initial tweet that ignited widespread attention featured a scanned image bearing the title Internal Hearing Transcript Courtroom for Federal Department of Justice. Below this title was an excerpt emphasized with bold blue ink, which read, "He did not shout," only cited Article 42 of the Civil Rights Act. The exact origin of this leak remained unknown. However, a common assumption among observers was that the individual responsible for posting the document was likely an administrative employee within the court system, someone who felt deeply disillusioned by the apparent silence and lack of transparency from the judicial apparatus regarding such a pivotal hearing. The content of the transcript revealed a very different portrayal of the individual named Trenton compared to the public's prior expectations. During the exchange, Trenton did not adopt the defensive or aggressive posture one might expect in such a high-stakes situation. Instead, he meticulously quoted each relevant line of the federal laws that govern civil rights, particularly those concerning the treatment of individuals during unlawful detention. His tone throughout the transcript was described as measured and steady, almost to the point of coldness. It was as if he were calmly reading legal provisions to a student who had not prepared for class rather than passionately defending his own position. This particular manner of delivery resonated powerfully with the public and quickly became the central quote referenced in countless social media posts, commentary videos, and political podcasts within just 48 hours after the leak. Despite the overwhelming attention and apparent support from many quarters, the reaction from the public was far from uniform. A vocal segment of the population, largely composed of individuals who had previously expressed strong opposition to instances of power abuse exposed online, began posting a series of sarcastic and critical comments. Some wrote statements such as, "So, does this mean if you are a government official, you are allowed to sit silently as a witness without repercussions?" Others asked pointedly, "So, when you hold a position of authority, you get exemptions. But what about ordinary people? This intense debate quickly ignited across the comment sections of numerous news articles and analytical pieces, leading to a sharp division within the online community. On one side, supporters argued that Trenton's conduct was exemplary. His calm and precise approach made it impossible for the system to turn against him. On the other side, critics accused the public discourse of bias, claiming that favorable reactions were due largely to Trenton's high-ranking status rather than the merits of his actions. Amid these polarized opinions, several social organizations began to take concrete steps to influence the unfolding situation. One prominent human rights organization based in Chicago formally submitted a petition to the federal court. Their request was clear. They demanded that the internal hearing, which until then had been kept confidential, be converted into a public trial. The organization's rationale was grounded in the belief that this case represented a crucial precedent that the judicial system needed to reconsider in terms of ensuring the right to fair treatment in all circumstances, regardless of the detainee's identity or status. The petition's wording was deliberate and impactful. "We do not speak out because he is the director of civil rights," the document stated, "but because if someone like him can be treated this way, what does it mean for the rest of the country?" The momentum around the case surged further when a respected Harvard law professor shared a video online that provided a detailed explanation of Article 42, the specific law referenced repeatedly by Trenton in the hearing. The video showed the professor seated in front of a whiteboard, a highlighter in hand, systematically pointing to each clause as if delivering a lecture to first-year law students. His delivery was clear, authoritative, and educational. The professor concluded the video with a powerful statement that left viewers in thoughtful silence. He does not need to raise his voice because the law speaks loudly enough if it is used at the right moment. On the very same day, a group of Columbia Law School students launched an initiative in the form of a website titled Read It Like Trenton. This platform was designed as an educational resource, sharing not only the federal civil rights laws, but also practical real-life scenarios to help ordinary people learn how to respond lawfully and confidently in situations similar to those Trenton faced. The website quickly gained traction, attracting nearly 200,000 visitors within its first 3 days of operation, reflecting a widespread public interest in legal literacy and civil rights advocacy. Despite the growing public attention and heated discussions, Malcolm Trenton himself remained conspicuously absent from the public eye. There were no official statements or comments from him regarding the leaked document or the various opinions swirling around it. He refrained from addressing the sarcastic remarks and criticisms that had emerged. Similarly, the Department of Justice maintained a stance of silence, issuing only a brief and formal announcement stating, "We are currently investigating the source of the document leak and will take appropriate action according to regulations." Yet, the reality was clear to everyone following the case closely. Once the transcript had been so widely disseminated, no official correction had left on public consciousness. Among the many images and screenshots shared throughout the day, one particular photo became the most circulated and emblematic of the entire controversy. Notably, this photo did not feature Malcolm Trenton himself. Instead, it was a simple printed sheet of paper, its text formatted in Times New Roman font, size 14. The first line of the text was a quote that succinctly captured the essence of Trenton's approach and the wider debate. "No one needs to scream when the law is clear." This phrase, stark and uncompromising, encapsulated the quiet strength of legal authority and the power of knowledge. It symbolized the belief that justice does not require loud protests or dramatic outbursts to be heard or respected. Rather, it rests on the clarity and enforceability of the law itself. The image and its message resonated deeply with many, sparking renewed calls for transparency, accountability, and respect for civil rights within the justice system. In the aftermath of this unprecedented leak in the ensuing public discourse, the case had evolved beyond a mere legal dispute. It had become a catalyst for national reflection on the role of law enforcement, the importance of civil rights protections, and the often unseen struggles faced by those who stand up against systemic injustice. It challenged assumptions about authority and power and highlighted the critical need for ordinary citizens to be informed and prepared to assert their rights effectively. The ongoing developments promised further consequences for the judicial system and the broader community, setting the stage for potential reforms and a deeper understanding of what true justice means in practice. As the public continued to engage passionately with the issue, the words printed plainly on that sheet of paper served as a quiet but persistent reminder. The law's voice is strongest not when shouted, but when understood and upheld by all. The Capitol building that morning was noticeably quieter and less chaotic than it typically was on days when important hearings took place. The usual buzz of reporters and cameramen inside the building was missing as the media were strictly prohibited from entering. Nevertheless, dozens of reporters had gathered tightly around the main entrances, positioning themselves strategically to capture every moment of those arriving for the hearing. Their cameras were focused intently on the faces of the guests invited to testify. Among those names on the publicly available guest list was Malcolm Trenton's, listed simply and plainly as Civil Rights Coordination Director at the Department of Justice, without any additional description or fanfare. Despite the minimal labeling, everyone who followed the developments knew well that today's hearing was far from routine or technical. This was the very first extended hearing convened by the Police Conduct Oversight Committee following a series of leaked videos that had revealed deeply troubling abuses of power occurring quietly across numerous neighborhoods with disproportionate impacts on citizens of color. Malcolm Trent entered the hearing room composed and steady, his expression calm and unreadable. He carried in his hand a thin folder, which he held with measured composure as he took his assigned seat in the witness area. This seat was directly beneath a large bold sign that read witness testimony, signaling his role as the primary individual to provide testimony that day. Around him, seats reserved for police representatives, public defenders, and 3 sociologists had already been occupied by their respective officials, each settled and prepared for the proceedings. After a brief opening statement from the chairwoman of the hearing, a black congresswoman representing the state of Georgia, the microphone was passed to Trenton. Rather than immediately opening his folder or beginning with the rehearsed speech, Trenton held the room with his steady gaze. His eyes scanned the assembly before he spoke, slowly and deliberately, choosing his words with precision. I am one of the few people of color fortunate enough to have drawn my badge before being handcuffed. But I am not here to speak about my luck. I am here to ask you all one question. How many people were not as lucky as I was? The room fell utterly still. No one moved. A handful of Congress members continued to scribble notes, but many raised their heads, clearly struck by the gravity of the question. Trenton set the folder down in front of him on the polished table and carefully unfastened the clip, securing the papers on the left edge. Methodically, he slid each document forward, laying them flat on the table for all to see. I have brought 7 cases to present, he said quietly but firmly. These individuals are not recorded on video. No footage exists showing them being shouted at or threatened. No recordings depict how they were pushed, threatened with guns, or detained merely because they lived outside areas covered by surveillance cameras. He then opened the first file without naming the person involved, stating only the facts. Male, 42 years old, detained on the roadside for unclear reasons. The police report cited lack of cooperation as justification. He suffered a relapse of a heart condition following the incident and passed away 3 days later. Turning the page, he continued with the next file. Female, 19 years old, frisked due to a suspicious gait. Her complaint filed with the local police was dismissed on the grounds of insufficient evidence. She dropped out of school 3 weeks later and developed severe depression. With a quiet, steady voice, he proceeded through each file, one by one. There was no anger, or accusation in his tone, just the cold, dark presentation of data and written records that revealed the system's failure to protect these individuals. As Trenton reached the seventh case, an elderly white congressman, seated nearby, someone who had previously served terms as chair of the House Judiciary Committee, slowly set down his pen. He did not look up, but nodded slightly and exhaled, deeply, as though the weight of the testimony had settled heavily on his shoulders. When Trenton finished, no one spoke immediately. The atmosphere in the room grew thick, burdened with the weight of the story shared. It was unmistakably clear that these cases were more than mere statistics. They functioned as indictments of the very policies that many present had once endorsed or allowed to persist. Suddenly, a congressman seated further back rose to his feet, a white man with graying hair and a distinguished career that included several high-ranking federal cabinet positions. He spoke in a voice low and slightly trembling. "We owe our citizens a better law," he said, "a law that is not only written, but truly understood, respected, and enforced exactly as it promises, though brief and unadorned." His statement carried immense gravity, suffusing the entire room with a heavier, more somber mood than ever before. Trenton did not respond or engage in further discussion. Instead, he methodically gathered the documents, carefully organizing each sheet with a practiced hand before quietly standing when the coordinator gave the signal marking the end of his testimony. There was no applause, no whispered comments, and no immediate questions posed because none were needed. BBZO or files had already spoken volumes. As Trenton exited the hearing room, a reporter positioned at a distance captured the moment on camera. The photograph showed him walking down the polished granite corridors of the Capitol building, holding nothing but the now closed folder firmly in his hands. The image quickly circulated widely, accompanied by a succinct caption. He carried the stories of 7 unnamed individuals into the most powerful place in the country and ensured their voices were heard, if only one. In that poignant moment, the true power of lawful protest was revealed. It was not measured by the number of supporters or by grand gestures, but by its ability to compel an entire system to pause, listen, and reckon with its own failures. The small newsroom was tucked away on the 3rd floor of a weathered old building, situated in the southern section of the city. The structure had clearly seen better days. Its concrete walls were thickly coated with a delicate layer of moss that further darkened the already dim interior. Natural light struggled to fully penetrate the narrow, grimy windows, leaving the space perpetually shadowed. In the storage room adjacent to the newsroom, rows upon rows of steel filing cabinets stood tightly packed together, their dull surfaces reflecting only faint glimmers of the scarce light. The silence in the room was broken only by the soft rustling of paper as Clara Dorsey, an investigative reporter for the Tribune, meticulously flipped through dense stacks of documents. She wore thin white gloves to protect the fragile pages and to avoid leaving any trace behind. For the past 3 weeks, Clara had been doggedly pursuing the Beckett case. She had filed multiple requests, each politely worded, asking for access to the internal disciplinary records within the county police force. Each time, however, her efforts were met with the same cold response. No relevant records found. The repeated denials only fueled her determination. Something was clearly being hidden. Then unexpectedly, that morning, a retired employee who had once worked in the Human Resources Department reached out to her. Without revealing much, the former staff member sent Claire an old file worn and yellowed with age without any clear label or identification. Upon opening it, Clara discovered that the file contained a provisional transcript from an internal meeting held 4 years prior. The meeting was vaguely titled Frontline Behavior Recalibration Training, a phrase that raised as many questions as it answered. Clara scanned through the notes rapidly. Amid the dense technical jargon and bureaucratic phrasing, one name stood out unmistakably. Troy Beckett. The first incident recorded took place near Harrison High School. According to the report, an African-American student named Kendrick Lloyd had been riding his bicycle against the flow of one-way traffic on a side street and was asked to stop. Beckett had reportedly stepped out of his patrol car and grabbed the boy's handlebars roughly, causing Kendrick to nearly fall. Beckett then slapped the boy, citing what he described as a provocative attitude and defiant look. The family of the student promptly filed a formal complaint, but the Internal Disciplinary Board dismissed the case unanimously, reasoning that the behavior did not constitute a significant violation. This outcome raised serious doubts about the fairness and transparency of the disciplinary process. The second documented case occurred at a gas station in the Northview district. An Asian woman had called the police to report a lost phone. When Beckett arrived at the scene, instead of taking the woman's statement, he interrogated her for more than 10 minutes, suspecting that she was staging the incident for insurance fraud. Despite the lack of any presented evidence supporting his suspicions, the official conclusion recorded in the report was that this was a sensitive situation requiring gentle reminders on approach. Such vague phrasing left the true nature of the incident unclear, but suggested that the officer's conduct was at least questionable. The third and most notable case involved an African-American man who was detained simply for wearing a hoodie in the middle of summer. The report briefly stated, "Subject wearing attire inappropriate for the weather, exhibiting suspicious signs. There was no illegal activity recorded, no search warrant issued, and no signs of resistance from the man." Nevertheless, he was held on the roadside for over 40 minutes. This file had never been subjected to further investigation or review. Clara's eyes moved swiftly to the last pages of the file where she paused at the acknowledgement section. There she found a signature that was all too familiar. Beckett. Next to his name was a line that read, "Commit to complete expedited conduct training within 14 days. Directly beneath that was a bold red note stating, "Data not public due to internal sensitivity." The implications were chilling. These files, despite involving serious complaints, were deliberately hidden from the public. Few days after unearthing this information, Clara published her article. She did not merely list the incidents, but posed difficult, direct questions. She asked why a person who had been formally complained about 3 times for discriminatory behavior was still assigned to patrol affluent, predominantly white neighborhoods. She also questioned why such records had never been released publicly before. The article's headline was bold and uncompromising. "Trennan is not just exposing one officer, he is revealing a system accustomed to blindness." Each paragraph tore at the fabric of the local police force's carefully constructed facade. In her closing remarks, Clara wrote, "Truth does not need a hammer. Sometimes it only needs one person to stand, not to shout, but to look directly, and force society to bow and face itself." Her words resonated far beyond the newsroom, stirring unrest in the community. Almost immediately after the article's publication, a group of concerned citizens filed a petition demanding an independent investigation. Politicians who had remained silent on such matters began to raise their voices. Trennan himself did not engage with the media or answer any interview requests. However, a spokesperson from the Department of Justice confirmed that all investigative journalism data will be transferred into federal oversight files. This declaration signaled a significant shift. A system that had long believed itself capable of covering up wrongdoing was now being stripped bare by a silent but potent weapon. Records, documents, and the cold precision of undeniable truth. The power of meticulous documentation had revealed what words alone could not. An entrenched culture of disregard and denial that had shielded misconduct for years. The tide was turning, and the once impenetrable walls of secrecy were beginning to crumble under the weight of fact and accountability. The sun had just started to break through the heavy clouds after 2 days of relentless rain, casting a faint glow over the tense atmosphere that had gripped the square in front of City Hall. People began to slowly gather, their faces a mix of anticipation, anxiety, and determination. A large sign was hastily erected near the entrance. its bold letters proclaiming emergency city council meeting police complaint handling procedures. Reporters jostled for position along the narrow corridor, their cameras trained directly on the stage where civil council members and representatives from the local legal department occupied every seat without exception. Not a single chair was left empty. The schedule was tight, precise, and meticulously followed. Yet conspicuously missing from the scene was Malcolm Trenton. His absence sparked initial confusion and whispers among the crowd, but soon after a thick envelope was quietly delivered to the chairman's desk by Trenton's personal secretary. The room fell silent as everyone's attention shifted to the envelope, which was carefully opened to reveal a succinct handwritten letter penned in blue ink. The handwriting was firm, precise, and clean, as if it forbade any corrections or alterations. The designated reader was the Civil Council chairwoman, Eleanor Rowe. Eleanor's voice broke the silence slowly and deliberately, carrying weight and resolve. I do not need you to listen to me today. What I need is for you to listen to the numbers I presented 7 weeks ago. Those numbers cannot shout, but they die. Like me, I was not beaten or handcuffed, but I was suspected just because of my skin color. If you truly reform the law, I do not need to win. But if not, I will return. The letter contained only 53 words, each one essential, none superfluous. When Elena lifted her gaze, she noticed many faces bowed in solemn reflection. A representative from the legal counsel gripped his pen tightly, as if those words had summoned the sword of conscience to hover directly over him. Moments later, the tone of the meeting shifted as an official announcement was read aloud. Officer Troy Beckett has been permanently dismissed from service to serious violations of racial fairness principles, causing systemic consequences, eroding public trust, and breaching professional ethics. The room fell into a deep, heavy silence. No applause echoed, no relieved sigh were heard. Everyone knew this was not the conclusion, it was merely the beginning of a long road ahead. The meeting progressed to its second stage where a fresh resolution was proposed. The Civil Council advocated for the establishment of an independent civil rights response team, a completely autonomous investigative body empowered to intervene immediately upon receiving complaints of police abuse. The team's jurisdiction would be especially focused on cases involving race, religion, or personal prejudice. This new force would operate entirely separate from the police internal affairs system, ensuring independence and transparency. Moreover, all case records would be made publicly accessible under the existing information access laws. When the proposal was presented and put to a vote by a show of hands, every civil council member unanimously supported it. Outside the city hall, a group of university students gathered, setting up a wooden board that bore a simple yet powerful slogan, "We are watching. You don't get to forget." Nearby, an elderly black woman stood quietly by a bus stop, her eyes fixed on the reflective glass windows of the building. She nodded softly, mirroring the same quiet acknowledgement she had offered just the afternoon before when Malcolm Trenton emerged from his first confrontation without uttering a single word. Far across the state at a small local school where Malcolm had once visited as a guest speaker, the civics teacher wrote a new phrase on the classroom board. One who remains calm is one who understands the power of silence. When students inquired why Malcolm had not returned to the hearing, the teacher replied thoughtfully, because some fight not to win a single battle, but to force the entire system to acknowledge they cannot remain silent forever. Back in the nation's capital, an internal email circulated within the Department of Justice, stating all federal units are required to review and enhance training procedures for law enforcement, particularly in regions with high minority populations. Notably, Malcolm Trenton's name was absent from this directive. Yet, everyone understood the truth. The story had started with one man who refused to shout or retaliate, but simply stood tall on the street, daring others to reveal their true nature. And now, that city was in the process of rewriting the rules, ushering in a new era of accountability and hope. One early Monday morning, long before most university lecture halls across the country flickered to life, a post quietly began to circulate on the student forum at Howard University. The post's title was simple, modestly capitalized, "A Letter to Mr. Trenton, the Man Who Dared to Stand Still Amidst Guns." It was written by Anwar Delaney, a third-year law student whose family had immigrated from Atlanta. Although the letter was brief and straightforward, each line resonated deeply, capturing the silent struggle of a generation that had grown accustomed to living in the shadow of anxiety, suspicion, and the constant expectation of rejection. "You did not shout," Anwar wrote, "but you made me want to sit down with myself and reflect on the moment I unknowingly surrendered my own dignity. For the first time in my life, I believe that a black man can live authentically without having to yell his identity to be seen." The closing sentence struck like a hammer. "Thank you for giving me a role model who survives amidst discrimination." This simple act of gratitude reflected not just a personal feeling, but a collective yearning for examples of quiet strength in a world often loud with conflict. Within just 10 hours, Anwar's letter had been shared nearly 200,000 times. Its reach extended far beyond Howard University's campus, appearing on student forums at Yale, UCLA, and Georgetown. Youth-oriented newspapers seized upon the letter, often reprinting it verbatim as the opening for their opinion pieces. A writer from the Student Tribune in Illinois offered a poignant reflection beneath the repost. "Perhaps we are witnessing a pivotal moment where symbols change not through slogans or chants, but through subtle acts of courage." Despite the overwhelming response, Malcolm Trenton himself remained silent publicly, the only trace of his voice beyond the viral video, and this letter was a brief email response to Anwar sent through a Department of Justice email system manager. The reply was toward "Do it right. No thanks needed." There were no exclamation points, no emojis, no flourish, just a straightforward command to continue the work properly. This minimalist reply sparked its own wave of admiration and discussion. A screenshot of the email was shared widely on social media, set against a plain white background with a handwritten caption from another student. "If this is how a strong person replies, then I hope I can learn that strength, too." The ripple effect did not stop with social media conversations. In Missouri, a high school principal who had read Anoise's letter and reviewed the full timeline of events was inspired to introduce a new subject into the official curriculum starting from grade 10. The course was titled Basic Civil Rights Law. At a subsequent parent-teacher meeting, the principal shared his motivation plainly. "If my students leave school and face questioning about their civil rights, the least I can do was ensure they have clear, confident answers." His words underscored a growing recognition that education must extend beyond textbooks and into lived realities. At the same time, a podcast hosted by a former law professor released a special episode entitled, "When Silence is Heavier Than a Sentence." The episode explored the Trenton incident as a rupture within the system, not because it was overtly violent or chaotic, but precisely because it unfolded with unnerving order and restraint. There were no blows, no blood, no physical evidence of wrongdoing, the host explained, yet something felt profoundly wrong. It is in moments like these that you understand the problem lies not in isolated acts, but in the enduring habits of power. Meanwhile, a quieter but persistent form of expression emerged in public spaces. A small advertising company in New Jersey took an unaltered photograph from the incident and placed it on billboards at local bus stops. The image showed Malcolm Trenton standing upright and composed while Beckett's head was bowed. Beneath the image appeared the phrase, "Some people shout, some people stand." The billboards carried no logos, no sponsor names, and no organizational affiliations. When questioned about their intentions, the company's director explained, "We are not trying to sell a product. We want to provoke thought to make people reconsider what strength and power really mean." From that point onward, Malcolm Trenton's name began to resurface in a variety of formal and informal settings. It appeared in academic seminars, educational literature, and even on ethics exam papers. Yet, oddly, Trenton never accepted invitations to speak publicly. He avoided political forums, refused to pose for commemorative photos with students, and declined offers from advocacy organizations. Despite this absence, his name became a quiet but enduring presence, often cited by those who were asked to identify themselves on the street and invoked by teachers encouraging their students about the right to dignity without needing credentials or official validation. Gradually, Trenton transformed into a symbol of something more subtle and profound than overt resistance. He embodied a refusal to allow courage to be trivialized or dismissed. No public speeches were released. No self-recorded videos were posted. Yet, people began referring to him as the man who does not need to speak. In a society that demands everyone to raise their voice to be acknowledged, this paradox became the very reason he could never be forgotten. His story and the quiet power he represented challenged the prevailing narrative that visibility and noise were the only paths to change. Instead, Trenton's calm, measured presence suggested that sometimes silence and steadfastness carried even greater weight. His refusal to engage in spectacle was not weakness, but a deliberate and powerful statement in itself. This inspired a new generation to reconsider what it meant to stand up for justice, not through loud protests or public declarations, but through dignified endurance and unwavering integrity. The letter from Anwar and the subsequent viral responses sparked conversations far beyond the university campuses. Discussions about civil rights, the nature of power, and the forms of resistance expanded into community centers, classrooms, and even family dining tables. People began to question their assumptions about strength and the ways in which courage can manifest in quiet, unassuming ways. Teachers used Trenton's example to illustrate lessons about dignity and resilience, while parents found hope in the idea that standing firm without shouting could still move mountains. Meanwhile, legal scholars debated the implications of Trenton's approach for activism and advocacy. Some argued that his calm defiance highlighted the need for systemic reforms that address not just overt racism, but the subtle procedural mechanisms of control that perpetuate inequality. Others saw in his silence a call to shift focus from confrontational tactics toward more sustained patient efforts for change. Across social media, hashtags emerged, celebrating the power of silence and quiet courage, reflecting a collective desire to broaden the vocabulary of resistance. Yet Trenton himself remained largely out of the spotlight. Friends and acquaintances described him as deeply private and deliberate in his actions, someone who understood that the most important work was often done away from public view. He continued his work within the Department of Justice, focusing on civil rights enforcement without fanfare or recognition. His avoidance of publicity was not a sign of retreat, but a reaffirmation that true impact often happens quietly, far from cameras and crowds. As the months passed, the story of Malcolm Trenton became part of a broader cultural shift. The image of the man who simply stood his ground without shouting echoed in art exhibits, poetry readings, and community gatherings. It challenged people to rethink the meaning of bravery and the ways in which individuals can resist oppression without losing their sense of self or dignity. In a world increasingly saturated with noise and spectacle, Trenton's example reminded many that sometimes the most profound statements are those made in silence. The legacy of the man who does not need to speak continued to inspire educators, activists, and everyday people striving for justice. His story encouraged a re-examination of what it means to confront power and injustice, emphasizing that courage need not always be loud to be effective. In this way, Malcolm Trenton's quiet strength became a beacon of hope for those who believe that dignity and perseverance can overcome even the most entrenched systems of inequality. Thus, the man who refused to say more than necessary and declined public acclaim became a symbol far greater than himself. His silence spoke volumes. It compelled society to listen differently and to value forms of resistance that had often been overlooked. Malcolm Trenton's story was not just about one man's courage, but about the power of quiet endurance in the ongoing fight for justice and equality. One late afternoon at the dorms of Howard University, a sophomore named Elijah Freeman opened his laptop and typed with slightly trembling hands. In the subject line, he wrote to Mr. Trenton, "The man who made me realize I don't have to stay silent just to stay alive." It wasn't a news article. It wasn't a social media post. Just an email over 700 words long recounting every moment Elijah had been glared at while entering a supermarket. Asked, "Do you work here?" while browsing books in a store? Or told by classmates, "You probably got into this school through a diversity scholarship." He ended it with a single simple line, "Thank you for existing as a symbol of survival." Just 2 hours later, he received a reply, still an email, exactly one sentence long. "Do what's right. No thanks needed. No pleasantries. No name. No signature." But it was that very finality that made Elijah sit still in silence for several minutes. He realized Trenton never acted to be celebrated. He didn't need acknowledgement. He existed so people like Elijah could keep moving forward without bowing their heads. The story of the email spread quickly through student forums and appeared in Instagram stories from East Coast to West Coast schools. A principal in the state of Illinois, after reading the news, sent a memo to the Education Board. "We will add civil rights law to the 10th grade curriculum, not to turn anyone into a lawyer, but so no one becomes a victim without knowing what rights they have." Over time, Trenton began showing up in graduation speeches, quoted in college admission essays, but never physically present anywhere. No live streams, no interviews, no guest appearances at honorary events. People started calling him the man who doesn't need a speech to make an impact. A photo of him standing on the street holding a badge, eyes locked on a police officer, is now printed and hung in law school libraries. No captions needed. No one has to speak for him. And he doesn't need anyone's thanks. The exhibition, "Those Who Do Not Need a Stage," opened quietly and modestly on the second floor of the Boston Museum of Contemporary Art, a place not meant for noise or glamour. There were no flashy banners or loud introductions, only a discreet email link sent to those who had followed human rights issues. Inside, the long room was bathed in soft white light. Photographs hung evenly spaced, each capturing a solitary moment without captions, names, or titles to judge or praise. Among these photos, right in the middle of the east wall, was a picture of Malcolm Trenton standing upright, one hand placed over his chest as if swearing an oath, the other hanging loosely by his side. Behind him, the blurred shadow of a patrol car tilted to one side. A nameplate Beckett scattered on the seat like a removed trace, a silent accusation. There was no sound in the photo, but viewers could feel the echo of deep sighs. A confrontation that needed no fists, a silent conflict more intense than violence. No caption, no date, no location, and no names appeared in the photo. Only a small discreet line under the frame read, "A man who stood at the boundary." It was brief, like a challenging message to enemies, mysterious to the unknowing, yet heavy with meaning for those who had witnessed and suffered injustice. Throughout the opening afternoon, visitors lingered longer in front of the photo of Trenton. They did not look for expressions on his face, but tried to understand why such a strong symbol chose not to assert himself, not to shout, not to demand titles or rights. A group of students nearby debated, "Why is his name not written?" Another whispered, "If a name is needed for recognition, this photo loses all its meaning." Among the visitors that day was a middle-aged man wearing a worn, dark jacket with a faded stitch mark on the lapel where a badge had been removed. He stopped in front of the photo, said nothing, his eyes silent, his rugged face struggling between what he once believed was justice and the harsh reality suppressed. Then he turned away without taking pictures or writing in the guest book. The gallery manager, who had stood in the corner since the start, witnessed it all. After the man left, a visitor asked the manager, "Who was he? Why is he looking at the photo so carefully? The manager replied without changing tone, a man who once wore a badge. Not anymore. When asked about the Trenton photo, why no biography or caption like the others? The manager scoffed, placed his hand on the wooden frame, and said, because, if it needs explanation, it has already failed from the start. It was in this cold silence that the photo spread across social media. Someone recorded and posted it with the caption, "When a man retains dignity without a title, the whole system should reflect on itself." That tweet surpassed 1 million likes within 12 hours. Yet, Malcolm Trenton remained silent, neither riposting nor confirming nor denying. Weeks later, an art teacher, Seattle, assigned a final project, recreate an important social moment without using real names. She did not mention the Boston exhibition, but over 30% of students recreated that exact photo, the black man standing in the street without labels, titles, or media lights. Just a man standing tall in the wrong place at a time no one expected. And in that moment, though without a badge, he made society bow its head to the mirror they had long tried to blur. This is the truth that those who abuse power and brandish guns to judge innocence or guilt must recognize. When you lose dignity, you lose power. When you push a person into the shadow of irrational suspicion, you only expose your cowardice and prejudice. Malcolm Trenton did not need to shout for the whole country to fall silent, nor fake authority to command respect. He only needed to stand tall, keep his dignity, and that was enough to break the wall of hatred and prejudice dark powers have built for so long. The Frontline Police Training Center in the Southeast region is always the starting point for hundreds of police careers each year. However, that Tuesday morning, the atmosphere inside the large auditorium was noticeably different. There were no technical exercises for arresting, no physical fitness tests, and no chase simulations. Instead, on the big screen appeared the words "Scenario Malcolm Trenton." Directly below was the photo that had once appeared on the cover of Time magazine, a black man standing in the middle of the street, eyes looking straight ahead, with a police officer bowing his head behind him. The instructor, a white man in his 50s who had served 22 years in the force, stepped into the center of the hall. His voice was deep but clear. "Before you place your hands on your guns, remember that justice is not something reserved for people like you. Today, we are not learning how to deal with people holding titles, but how to avoid confusing confidence with the right to judge." Then he signaled to play the original 38-second video clip. The image was unclear, but the sound echoed through the space. "I work for the Department of Justice." Trenton's voice was clear, but calm. A young officer sitting in the third row turned to his friend and murmured, "Why didn't he just say that from the start?" The instructor paused the video and pointed to the center of the room. "Who just spoke? Stand up." The young officer hesitated before standing. "What's your name?" "Kevin Barnes." "Kevin, if you were a front-line officer and the person in front of you had no federal badge, was not wearing a vest, did not know the law, but was still insulted, what would you do?" Kevin thought for a moment and said, "I would maintain a professional attitude." The instructor nodded, neither criticizing nor praising. He turned to the entire class and said, "Maintaining professionalism is not a badge to boast about. It is the minimum we must have." A female trainee raised her hand and asked, "What if we get insulted? What if civilians deliberately provoke us?" He looked at her, paused for a few seconds, then replied, "Doing right is not to be praised, but to avoid doing wrong." The statement plunged the auditorium into silence. A veteran officer at the back whispered to a younger colleague, "Back in my day, everyone thought wearing the uniform meant standing above others. Now it's different." On the screen, the next slide appeared, Behavior Comparison Model, Malcolm Trenton. The trainees were given freshly printed manuals. In the first section, the bold headline read, "Police do not have the right to judge others as innocent or guilty. They only have the right to act according to the law." A series of questions were posed. asking trainees to write by hand. How would you handle it if the person asked to cooperate does not provide sufficient information? How would you respond if that person remains silent, but still looks at you as if you have no authority? Another young officer wrote, I would not let emotions dictate my behavior. The instructor passed by, nodded lightly, and marked a tick in the notebook margin. At the back of the auditorium, a group of supervisors from the State Justice Office observed the session. One of them pressed his pen to take notes. The course effectively changes initial attitudes. This was a pilot program required after incidents that went viral on social media, with the Malcolm Trenton case as a prime example. The goal was not to create absolute consensus, but to pressure law enforcement to face limits they had previously ignored. At the end of the session, the instructor did not give a test. Instead, he read aloud a quote from a congressional hearing in which Trenton had spoken, "How many people are not as lucky as I am?" Then he turned off the lights, leaving the room dark with only the screen's light illuminating the face of a man who did not need to shout to make society stop. The trainees rose one by one, quietly and without applause. As he stepped out of the auditorium, Kevin Barnes paused before the bulletin board listing the courses. Under the line, Training Model, Name Malcolm Trenton, there was a small note written in white chalk. Don't become someone who needs a viral incident to learn how to behave. Kevin looked at it for a long moment before pulling out his phone to message his classmates. Today, I understand why some people don't need to get angry, but still make the entire force feel small. From that day on, in regular training sessions at the center, the lesson named Malcolm Trenton became an indispensable part. No one was forced to remember his name, but everyone understood, if you do right from the start, you will never need to apologize later. On a late afternoon toward the end of the month, sunlight pierced through the dense tree canopies lining Mason Street, a street that had witnessed far too many stains of injustice and wrongs that should never have existed. Malcolm Trenton walked slowly along the sidewalk, the same place where only months before he had been ordered to sit down like a suspicious stranger, like an unconvicted criminal in the eyes of those who arrogantly assumed the right to judge. Now, there were no radios blaring, no sirens wailing to signal a chase, no shadows watching through binoculars or surveillance cameras. Only the peaceful street remained, with a few cars parked neatly along the curb and a grocery store slightly ajar, selling ice and afternoon newspapers as usual. Trenton was not dressed in a sharp suit, nor did he carry any badge or wear any symbol of federal power. He was simply wearing a rolled-up sleeve shirt, gray fabric pants, and worn leather shoes softened by years of walking. He paused beside a wooden fence that bore a dark-cut mark in the grass, the spot where he had been forced to sit under suspicious and prejudiced eyes. Now the grass had grown back lush, soft, and clean, free of any footprints or prying, disdainful looks that had once held him captive in doubt. A patrol car slowly drove by and stopped at the pedestrian crossing. The young officer with dark skin nodded in greeting to Trenton as he prepared to cross the street. The look was not one of fear or avoidance, but one of equality and respect between two ordinary citizens, as if years of abuse of power and discrimination were only distant stains of the past. Trenton returned the nod gently and continued walking, each step neither rushed nor dragging like the way he had lived, never demanding attention, but always leaving a profound impression. From the right, a house opened its window. A white woman stood beside a pot of dahlias, looking at him with eyes that were neither loud nor pleading, only enough to say, "Thank you for not walking away after that day." Her voice was soft as the breeze, whispered with every breath, yet enough to make Trenton pause halfway. He turned his head without smiling, but his eyes spoke volumes. Not the kindness of forgiveness, nor the coldness of delayed justice, but the calmness of one who had faced challenges and accepted every change without needing applause. He did not reply, nor did he need to. The woman said nothing more. They turned their backs and walked in opposite directions, as if they had completed a heavy part of their life's duty. No video captured that moment, no interviews were sought, and no touching posts flooded social media. But in every glance across the neighborhood, people understood the unspeakable truth. Since that day, no one had been stopped without cause. The old surveillance area signs were replaced by new ones reading Community Respect Zone. The local police station expanded training classes for high school students to eliminate ignorance, prejudice, and abuse of power. Numerous officers formerly working there had left, including Beckett. His name disappeared from every public roster. The city council quietly removed the cold sign that once read, "The law is the law, no matter who stands before it." Following intense community backlash, Trenton walked the entire length of Mason Street and then turned into the small park at the end. Children played around the fountain, their laughter spreading a gentle atmosphere. A young mother holding a cold drink handed it to her son, briefly noticing Trenton passing by and slightly tilting her head and greeting. He did not know their names, nor did he need introductions, but the mother's eyes said enough. They knew who he was. No television needed, no viral moment required. He sat down on a wooden bench beside the largest tree in the park, arms crossed over his stomach, eyes fixed on the small lake, the place where silent protests demanding justice had once taken place. The water reflected the blue sky and the heavy, gray clouds. Trenton said nothing and needed no one to speak for him. Those who had done the right thing, like they did not need to raise their voices, for their silence was something no one else could deny or forget. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Malcolm Trenton stood up and stepped into the deep shadows of dusk, blending into the flow of people on another street, as if he had never been the focus of a national crisis, but in the neighborhood that once witnessed pain and injustice. From then on, no one was regarded as a stranger needing checks. That victory, though unnoticed by many, was a true victory, soaked with sweat, tears, and the quiet courage of a man who refused to be treated unfairly because of his skin color or appearance. Early Monday morning, the third-floor hallway of the Federal Department of Justice building was quieter than ever. Not cold, but gentle, as if designed to make people think more, speak less, and look deeper before rushing to judgment. The faint white lights reflected on the high ceiling. Footsteps echoed softly on the pale gray tile, each sound seeming to remind that this was a place where power and justice were carefully weighed, not a place for chance or rash action. In front of the Civil Rights Director's office, where Malcolm Trenton had silently left nearly 2 weeks earlier after submitting his resignation, a small new wooden plaque had been hung. It had no gold trim, no official seal, just a light-colored piece of wood laser engraved with a brief but sharp sentence. "Everyone has the right not to be suspected just because they are different from you." The words were steady, not bowing to any scrutinizing gaze. They were strong enough to stop hurried passers-by and make them look again, even if just for a blink. A teenage boy wearing a white shirt, khaki pants, and a backpack slung over one shoulder came up the stairs. He looked about 17, not yet fully adult in appearance, but his eyes held sharp alertness and curiosity, traits of a generation unwilling to accept blind obedience or meaningless silence. It was his first day interviewing for a summer internship, a program the Civil Rights Office had launched 3 years earlier to encourage young people to understand rights, law, and human dignity. The boy paused in front of the plaque, reading the sentence once, then again. His expression visibly shifted from simple observation to the start of awakening. He turned to the reception desk where a black woman in uniform smiled gently, offering quiet encouragement. He asked, his voice not loud but firm, "Who wrote this?" The woman looked up, her smile unchanged, but her eyes briefly sad, like someone who had experienced enough to know that behind that question was a generation seeking truth, not flowery words. She replied softly, like a breath, "Someone who used to sit in that office. No name needed." The boy nodded, asking nothing further, but he stayed, his eyes fixed on the words, as if wanting not only to memorize them, but to embed them deep into his consciousness and soul. Inside the room, the desk remained intact. Trenton's personal files had been cleared away, leaving only a few pending policy reform reports and a leather-bound notebook titled Situations That Need No Explanation. The notebook had no signatures, no directives, only analytical notes on police behavior from a civil rights perspective. Each page marked with a green sticky note stating, "Just make sure they are treated right." A new staff member entered the office, bowing his head toward the plaque one last time before opening the door and stepping in. Within the Department of Justice, few spoke of Trenton anymore. There were no portraits or memorial ceremonies. Yet, everyone knew that federal laws governing police traffic stops had been revised toward greater transparency, removing sections filled with biased content that once caused unwarranted suspicion. At a high school in Detroit, the Trenton case was included as a model case study in textbooks. Teachers did not show clips, but asked students to write responses to the scenario. You witness someone being mistreated. You have no power. What would you do? There were no right or wrong answers, but after class, the number of students choosing to turn on their cameras when witnessing injustice surged dramatically. In Texas, a public referendum on independent police oversight passed, largely thanks to a quiet media campaign sparked by the incident involving Trenton. No one called for it loudly or declared victory on television, but in public opinion analyses, the hashtag silent but not forgotten repeatedly appeared. Meanwhile, in the third-floor hallway in front of the door that once led to Trenton's office, the wooden plaque remained quietly hanging, neither dazzling nor guarded with no protective glass frame. Yet everyone who passed by saw it, and each time they looked, they were forced to ask themselves, "Have I ever suspected someone just because they were different from me?" The plaque was silent and enduring like the person who left it behind. No podium, no ceremony. But from that moment on, whenever a police officer raised a hand to stop someone on the street, they would remember the small phrase once hung on a great door. Everyone has the right not to be suspected, just because they are different from you, and if anyone still needed to know who wrote it, the answer would always be someone who used to sit in that office. No name needed. The story of Malcolm Trenton is not a triumphant anthem of victory, but a living testament that silence, when paired with dignity and intellect, can force an entire system to pause and reflect. In a world where judgment often precedes conversation, where identity is assumed based on skin color or silence is mistaken for weakness, Trenton's calm and principled stance stands as the sharpest form of resistance. He didn't need to shout to defend his worth. He didn't need a title, a press conference, or a badge to justify his presence on that street. What he possessed and never surrendered was knowledge, integrity, and the uncheckable belief that no one deserves mistreatment just because they look or live differently. Trenton doesn't represent a single community. He represents everyone who has ever been misunderstood, humiliated, and yet chose principle over outrage. This story teaches us that the real question is not who is he, but rather how have we been treating one another. Every baseless glance of suspicion, every racially charged comment is a cut into the fragile trust between human beings. But justice, when upheld by people who quietly do what's right, who stand their ground without needing applause, always finds a way to win. Have you ever been misjudged just because someone didn't really know you? Have you ever been underestimated only to prove you're far more capable than they thought? If this story made you pause and reflect, share it so others can learn, too. Change doesn't start with loud speeches or grand gestures. It begins with how we choose to see and treat one another every single day. Thank you for walking alongside Trenton's story. We promise to keep bringing you powerful, honest narratives that awaken the conscience and inspire change. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that move and empower.